Yeah. So when did you get into this?
Well, this is was back in the mid '70s actually, and back in those times, most of the older hunters would tell you it just was impossible to box bobcat rig them. And I always kind of agreed with that. I didn't know any better, but I'd seen guys when I was just a kid in the '60s, I'd seen guys bear hunt, but of course it would strike dogs from the rig on bear, but that's of course kind of understandable. But anyway, I'd actually went out with this friend, and he had a couple dogs they were decent dogs. They weren't what I'd call great cat dogs, but I went out with him, and I sat there and I watched them. They struck bobcat off the box, and we found the tracks, ran the cat, whatever, and I was about 20 something years old, and I thought, well, heck, if they can do it, I can do it. And I had a dog called Ranger that was an excellent cat dog, but he'd never been rigged. So how youth is, I just figured, well, I'll do it. I didn't really know how, but outside of throwing them up there, and I had a '74 Bronco, no place to rig, so I bought me a luggage rack and put it on the hood, and I had Ranger and a red bone bloodhound cross I put up there on the hood, and I just cruise around. I hunted at night then too, so I just cruise around and hope they'd do something, and I couldn't do it very long because I just imagined I was running over dozens of cat tracks, so I would do it about 30 minutes or maybe an hour at a time, and I'd have to put them down and road them. And finally they didn't really strike one, but I noticed they started wiggling their tails up there. And I said, well, maybe they're smelling something. Well, I stopped and let them down, and sure enough, they were smelling cat, and ran them and treat them and stuff. So I then decided I wanted them to bark before I put them down. So when they started wigging their tails, I'd get out and I'd start hissing them and hollering them and encouraging them to bark.
Sure.
And as soon as they barked, I would let them down, and they just went from there and just made old Ranger was still one of the best dogs I ever owned, as far as rigging, well, all around, but as far as rigging too, so that's kind of how I got started. And then there was other guys. There was an old hunter named Don Pankey that lived up the North Umpqua, hunted bobcat his whole life, and he was retired. He was much, much older than me, and he didn't believe it could be done. So he wanted to go hunting with me. So he came down, and we went out Singletree out of Winston, went up there in the Bluffy country, and old Ranger struck two bobcat off the box that day. One of them we got jumped and saw, and we lost it in the bluffs. But from that time on, old Don said, boy, from that moment on, he said, I had to have me a rig dog. He said, I couldn't rest till I got me one, and he finally did. And then, more and more guys, once they saw it could be done, they just started putting their dogs up there, or hunting with somebody like my buddies and stuff hunted with me, and we'd put their dogs up and get them to going. But not all of them would strike, of course. Some of them, some were more natural at it. Some took a little time, and some of them never would rig.
Yeah, some just don't have it.
Yeah, they just, for whatever reason, some of them might, smell one, but they won't bark. And you hear a lot of guys say, well, if a dog's real barky, they'd probably make a rig dog, which is probably true to an extent. But I've seen silent dogs that were good rig dogs. They wouldn't bark on a track on the ground hardly at all, yet they'd smell a track off the cat off the box, and they'd yope a couple times.
Yeah, and I guess that's like when I started. I guess I didn't know there was any other way to hunt other than, like obviously if it snowed, you'd look for a track, but like right. Bear hunting, every dog a guy owned was rigging. So like when I heard people looking for rig dogs, it was kind of surprising, but I was in my 20s and knew everything, and now I look back, and even the dogs I'm hunting now, I got one that might give me a bark or two. You really got to pay attention to her, like you're saying, body language. And it is funny how, some of them just have it, and some you can't train it into them. They just won't.
I know I've seen them that would just ride up there. You would think they would just act like they were just looking. Just like they would strike on us just as soon as they got scent, and they wouldn't bark a lick. And I've seen some kind of about half lazy up there that made great rig dogs. And I like mine. I've had several of mine out of my dogs that would just, when they smell a cat, they just bark a time or two. They're just like yo yo yo,
Right.
And I've had some that like my dog right now, if he's not hunted regular, he's mouthy up there. He barks a lot, which I don't like, but I don't try to break him from it because I had one years ago that was the same way, and I broke him off of barking up there, but I also broke him from boxing.
Oh,
And it took about a month for him to start back again, but he also, he also babbled. He was a hyper dog, and he had to bark, so I had to live with it. But
yeah,
I
it's
don't.
like a give and take, right? You put
Right?
up with
Yeah,
some for something
yeah.
else.
I didn't like I say didn't like it then. I don't like it now. But like with the old hunter dog I called him. I would shock him on when just for babbling. Not of course not when he was striking, but he
Hmm.
couldn't separate the two, so he just shut up completely. And it was about 30 days when he started back up again. But he also started babbling. So I just you have to live with it. A box dog, man's worth a fortune, and
Yeah,
some things, just like you said, you got to put up with to get what you want. So I did. But
yeah. I learned the value of a good rig dog after I lost all mine. Unfortunately, that's what it took.
oh
I had, really good rig dogs, I would say, not trying to sound egotistical, but, like we were talking blue ticks the other night, and that
yeah,
Henry dog of mine, I mean, a lot of our customers have heard me talk about him, but he was a Cameron and Uchman bred blue dog that I
yeah,
worked with Brett Williams on. And we studded out to his male, and we got some really nice pups out of it. They were, I mean, that was that whole litter that we showed and hunted, and they did really well. But the one thing I will say about that dog is he was a rig dog deluxe. And if he did not smell anything, you could drive around for 12 hours with that dog and you'd never hear him whimper. But when he found something, you knew it. And it didn't matter if that track was right under him or if he had to go 500 yards to actually get to the game. It's like next thing you know, he'd open up, you'd turn him down, and it'd be dead silent until he got where he was going. And then it was on. And you lose that. I will tell you that one hurt.
oh, I know. And especially like say when you're starting over, when you got to start one from scratch, or if you lose your old dogs and starting over, that's a pain. I mean, you gotta you got to have the right dog to start over with, because you got the wrong ones. Well, you're wasting time basically on trying to train something that doesn't have it in it. So it's a process getting back where you want to be.
Yeah, it's kind of like tree dogs, I think. You can train a lot of dogs to tree, but like to naturally locate and tree, like that's in them. It's either going to do it or you're going to enhance what little bit they have.
Right.
But
I,
that dog you're talking about, is that Romeo?
yes.
Hey,
Yeah. He's
why
a
don't you
little hyper.
describe him a little bit?
Oh, well, okay. He looks like a registered walker, but he's out of my old blue tick female. She's over 5/8 blue tick, and she's got her daddy was registered and all. But anyway, he turned out tricolored, and he was the most natural dog I've ever owned so far. Now I'm 69, but he was cold tracking, treeing, and running and everything before he was a year old. He started treeing at 8 months old on the big cat, and cold tracking just about the same time, and he just constantly just got better. A real fast learning dog. He's I kind of think he's mostly blue tick traits. He's cold nose, big ball mouth. Really, he moves the track good. He drifts out a little bit, but not so bad that he runs off track a lot. He really carries the track good. When he hits a road, you think even on an old cold track, you'd think he's got a jump track. He just balls to the wall down the road. Just full speed until he gets it off the road, and then it depends on how old the track is. He'll slow down then, or if it's hot, he'll keep burning it. But he's a pressure tree dog. Just a really well-rounded dog. He's one of the four best I've ever owned as far as that goes. Tree and cat by himself. He's treated a lot of cat and fox by himself. His sire is out of a lot of people probably know Willie Sutherland in California, but that's the stock of dogs I bred into mine, and they're Walker, blue tick. They got a little black and tan in them way back, and of course the running dog. And Willie and his dad have bred those up for close to 90 years. I mean, 100 years, I think is what John told me, his cousin.
Yeah, I know those
Uh,
guys been in dogs a long time, that whole family.
Yeah, they've got pictures back when Willie's 80 years old now, and they got pictures back catching cat when he was just a kid, you know. And you can look at their dogs and see their blue tick walker running dog crosses. You know, you can tell just by looking at them. But they were they were the type of hunter they just bred for ability. They weren't worried about the color of a dog, you know.
Right.
And they just Willie's got some dandies, you know. He still hunts hard, and it was kind of weird how I got that because I was looking for a stud to breed to my old female, that I wanted one that could do it alone. You know, I don't mess with dogs that are running a pack basically because it a little scares me a little bit. But anyway, a guy named Dave Anderson in California seen my a little ad I'd put on Big Game Houndsman, and I didn't know him from nothing, but he called me up and he was telling me about this dog. The dog's name was Rod, and come to hell, he didn't even own the dog. It was his buddy's Willie, and he was retired. And he said that's one of the best hounds I've seen in my life. You know, and of course that really intrigued me. So I called Willie up and talked to him for a while, and Dave said he won't brag on the dog, so don't worry about that. But anyway, I finally offered Willie. I said, Willie, I'll pay you. I didn't tell him exactly. I would have went to $1,000, but I didn't tell him that. But I told him I'd pay whatever he wanted or whatever he asked for to breed to that dog. And he said, well, I'll just take a pup. You know, him and his cousin took a pup each. You know, and I kept three, and the two I had them at a tree, and both males at 8 months old sat there and hung the tree, and the little female I'd kept was actually my favorite. She didn't tree. So I said, well, I kept three in hopes of getting one. So I'll sell her, and mess with these two. And I sold her to a friend down there in Grants Pass. And anyway, she's treeing now too. But I kept the two males because they showed the treeing earlier. And it's just that whole litter. There was about, there was 10. I think two didn't get hunted and one got called, and the rest of them all run and treed, just a best cross I've ever made too, so.
It's always
I was
good when
really
it's the
tickled
whole
with it.
litter, huh?
Yeah, that's unusual because I haven't never bred a lot, but usually what I ended up with is like one or two good ones out of the litter, and the rest of them, wooden tree basically was what ended up the reason they didn't make it is because they wouldn't tree, but usually they had a lot of running dog in them, and for whatever it just knocked the tree in them, or for whatever reason they didn't tree. So I always had a trouble that way, and till you get those guys in California. That's good. They've bred those dogs for just like we said, for decades, getting that tree and put into that mixed in with that running dog and pushing and stuff to catch game. So it really paid off. As a matter of fact, I can't remember if I've told you about. We made that cross again, and I've got two. They'll be 5 months old Monday. I got two pups out of this litter, so I'm hoping that that things go the same way. But and with breeding, you never know. But I'm hoping they turn out as good as the first litter. So
yeah, it's funny how sometimes the same cross is you'll either hit it right on, or you can have the exact same cross and they're different. They don't do what the other one did.
I know I've heard that. I've heard guys that like the first cross was excellent, so they made it again. The second cross was duds. It's just, you wouldn't think that would happen, but there's so many genes in dogs that make the dog. So many different qualities you got to have. You can kind of understand it if they just don't mix up just right.
Well, like you and I were talking the other night, just because it's a blue tick or a walker or a running dog, like there's no magic quarter this, eight this, half this.
No.
Because those genes, if they don't line up, they don't line up. And those traits, right. You've been around long enough. You see that in a line of dogs. It's there because of selective breeding, Right. So it's like, doing your research and knowing where you're getting your dogs. Hey, it sounds like you were pretty lucky to be in a pretty good group of guys there.
Well, yeah, over the years, I've had buddies and stuff that I bred into their dogs. They'd get that dog and do it all, and we'd breed back and forth into each other's dogs, to try to keep the balance going, getting
Right.
a balanced hound. And like I say, we didn't get litterfuls of them, but when you start getting several of them that make it, that you're doing something right. You're progressing anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
So like the you talk about the running dog stuff mixed into them, or I know a lot of guys call them Northwest cat dogs, whatever guys want to label them.
Oh,
But
West Coast or
that's
something.
yeah, West Coast cat dogs. It's not a new thing. Like it's not something that's just been around in the last 10 years. You guys have been
No.
hunting and mixing that stuff in for a long time.
Yep. Well, an interesting story there that Don Pankey and Sid Roper were two of the first cat hunters I'd ever heard about as a kid in Roseburg. And Sid had bought a little female from a coyote hunter that came up. Rick Turner was his name. He came up from California, and he ran coyotes, but he bought a dog off of Dan Sutherland. That was Willie's dad, and because he had to have the money, and he'd planned to buy this dog back, but worked out he didn't. So the dog's name was Belle, and Rick was a coyote hunter, so he sold her to Sid. And anyway, he got, I don't know how many cats he caught with the dog alone, but he just hunted one dog. And it just so happened that I got uh, into that line of dogs too. And then when Willie come up to see the pups that we had bred, he come up. First thing he asked me was, did I ever hear of a dog called Belle up here? And I said, I sure did. As a kid, that was one of the first cat dogs I ever heard about. And I told him, my blue tick goes back to her. And then he started telling me the story about how his dad bred her up and how he sold her and everything. So, and she was, I think, if I remember correctly, she was tree dog and running walker, and a little like 45-pound female. And he also, it was interesting, he said she was the only walker colored one in the litter. So I assume the others were blue tick and black and tan. But she was a dandy, and she was one of those legends you hear about. Uh,
Right.
and anyway, that's one of the lines. Well, that was Willie's line back then too, but I happened to get into it. So actually, the dog I bred Raisin to, they were actually way back there. They're related. So that they say that helps when you get the common foundation in your dogs, as far as reproducing.
Right.
And I think that probably worked, or it had to help. But
I would
it was
agree
kind
with
of,
that.
yeah,
As long
yeah,
as you don't go too tight. So I've been there. We've had some really, really tight ones that
well, I've never been I have done that. Matter of fact, I bred Romeo back to his mother, which is an inbred cross, and I did that once before. It's not something I would recommend doing, but I think I think if you got a couple of really good dogs, it might click for you.
right.
But I've got a blanket back male out of them he looks English, ticked up. And he's not didn't start anything like his dad, but he's coming along gradually. But I sold a couple females to a couple guys, and gosh dang, they were just bragging on them before they were a year old how well they were doing. So, and I didn't get it, as far as I know, I didn't get any physical faults or mental problems, which if
Right.
you can run into if you get carried away with that stuff.
Yeah, it's a gamble to start with. I know,
Yes,
and
it
that's
is.
what we always looked at was, find the dogs that you like. Like I can tell you, there was a dog that my mentor, he used to hunt. His name was Luke, and he came from a buddy of ours that was down at bear camp with us. And man, he just reproduced. And that's the hard part is not all good dogs will reproduce.
Nope, that's true.
Henry was that dog. I mean, he was a bang up dog for me, but nothing he ever really produced was anywhere close. Where Luke, it was like, God, we still talk about those dogs and try to figure out ways, to get kind of back to it. And they kept it going for a while, but now it's getting, I would assume it's getting a little washed out. He hasn't
Well,
been around for years, but I don't
I
know.
think that's something you gotta. I think that's when we were talking about selective breeding. That's where you gotta, because you'll get. I mean, guys will have really good male, and then naturally guys that have average, mediocre females or even less will want to breed to them.
Mm-hmm.
And they sometimes a guy will maybe do it for money or because it's a buddy or what. And as soon as you start that stuff, you start watering your line down.
Yeah.
You're weakening it. It's extremely hard to find two top dogs to breed together. I mean, like top female, top male. That's out of something. That's very, very difficult. Uh,
Oh yeah.
and
I mean, and think about them both being alive or reproducible at the same time. Like you're lucky to find those dogs that make the magic cross in a lifetime. Like, oh, I wish I could have bred so and so to this dog, if they were still around or whatever.
right, right,
Finding them that are still even around or within traveling distance. I mean, now I guess you can ship semen. A lot more guys are doing that, but God, it
yeah,
is something that I tell you, if you're being real honest about dogs, that's a really hard thing to find is good pairings and being able to admit that they were junk. Like sometimes it just doesn't work, and it's no
right,
reflection on you per se.
right. You can just like you just said, you can breed. I've bred two top dogs, and like I say, most of the pups weren't. There might have been one or two in the litter, but the vast majority didn't make it. And why? I of course, and I'll admit too, I didn't know much about the backgrounds of some of them, which is the big.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the big decider there, because the more you know about the parents and grandparents, I think the better decision you can make on breeding.
Yeah.
Uh, I know, like the dog I bred, Romeo's dad. He was a cat dog, do it by himself, and both his parents were dogs that could do it alone, and then a lot of them further back. So that all, and then on my side, I know seven, I think at least seven generations back what my old raisin dog goes back to.
Right.
And my what I look for in dogs, I got to have a coal nose. They got to sound like a hound, good conformation. They got to have good speed. I'm not, extra fast is a bonus, but I'm more concerned about tracking ability than I am speed.
Right.
And then of course for bobcat they got to be able to be good locators and tree good enough for you to get there. I don't care if they do it every breath or not, but I want them to tree good enough that I can get to the tree.
Sure. Yeah, without looking at the Garmin.
Yeah, right. That's that those that's modern equipment's kind of, it can hurt you in I mean, you can help a dog do things that you wouldn't be doing anything.
Right.
You can use them that kind of might be detrimental if you took a dog that you had to have the Garmin to get, and then you bred that dog, and you have to buy a new Garmin every year or two, to keep catching game. So electronics it's kind of a six of one, half a dozen of the others, they all say.
Oh, it's changed dogs. I'm telling you, hands
Yeah,
down, like without a doubt, you will never convince me that the technology hasn't influenced the type of dogs that we're hunting now. Because I see it in my own backyard. I mean,
yeah,
there is no way that these dogs would have cut it for me. At least, I shouldn't say that. I'll back up. The way that I've conditioned them and the types of dogs that they are, very different than the dogs I used to hunt with. Not saying that they couldn't do all those things and maybe excel in some areas, but I'll tell you, I don't have a lot of grubbing them up cold races because I don't let them do it. Or I don't have rock solid tree dogs because they stop when it goes up and I walk, versus having to sit there and listen to them and get there. It's like, I know that it's going to be right here in this area and walk in, and if they're out of tune, heck, I'll find them for them. It's
right.
stuff that, I say the old timers endearingly, but that wasn't going to fly back 30 years ago.
Right. I've heard of that. I've heard of guys doing that before, tree and cat, and it just kind of ended, and they'd walk in there and find a cat where, like you say, like the dog stayed in there around the general area where they could find it. And you got a treed cat there and another thing is a lot of guys like a tight mouth or even silent dog. And back in the old days, I mean, you'd be looking for the dog most of the time, and nowadays you still got the GPS where you can still follow right along with the dogs barking or not.
Right. So was that a
Yeah.
thing back when you guys were starting with, I'm going to call them the West Coast cat dogs, when those were becoming noticeably different? I mean, because of the traits, and they have a look to them too. I mean, if guys have seen them, they all kind of got a look. Was the tight mouth a thing you guys were looking for back then, or is that a new generation,
I think
thinking it's
that's,
helping them?
back because I was born before the electronics, and everybody had their dogs were, everyone that I knew almost had open trailer. I mean, they opened cold tracks and jumps, but I did met a guy or two that had dogs that didn't open. They didn't open on a cold track. And of course, this was before electronics. So the one guy put a bell on there would help us a little bit, but you'd meet them up in the woods. I met both of them up in the woods later, and their dog was out tracking. But they had to wait till they were trying to find him when he started opening on the jump track.
Right.
And they were just, that's something I couldn't put up with that then, or I wouldn't put up with it now. It's just not something. I like to hear the race. I like to hear them trail and stuff. So
Sure.
I want them to be barking. And that's, like I say, as I mentioned, now with the GPS, if you like a silent dog, you can hunt them with no problems now.
Right. Yeah, it's different. I can never seem to find the right combo. They're either way too open, or like these dogs, they'll slip out quiet, and it's like, guys, just bark. Like, give me like 2 or 3 to ship somebody that's a little more open. And of
Right.
course, they do it right as they're cresting the hill. It's like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, now we're gonna let you know that I'm out here doing it all alone. But those varmints are different. I mean, and I know you're running a lot of cat and fox, and I find it interesting that all these dogs, that pretty much all the guys running these West Coast varmint dogs, they all go back to the stuff from 50, 60 years ago, or older. It's those traits have kept up over the years and like consistently produced that style of dog.
I think, a lot of them, you probably can't find many dogs out, unless they were registered. You probably can't find any dogs out here that don't have some running dog.
Right.
The amount might differ. Personally, I like to keep it down. I like it probably. I probably like a quarter or an eighth, somewhere around there, because just a little bit of running dog goes a long ways.
Mm-hmm.
And like I mentioned to you, I mentioned to somebody that when you cross into them running dogs, most people, everybody wants something to catch game, but you can also, you can lose your tracking ability, you can lose your nose, and you can lose your treeing. And so you got to have that kind of mixed up right with the tree dog in.
Yeah, like you were talking to me about that, because like we said, I've seen running dogs that got just as good a track ability or not better than some straight tree hounds I've ran with. But it's getting the right combo, and getting those genes to line up just right. And that's why, a lot of this stuff it's pretty harbored. It stays in tight groups, and the guys that get it, they stick with it because it's worked all these years. And you got to think, like, for the listeners, where Robin's hunting is not easy ground. I mean, I'm not going to give away where you're hunting, Robin, but I know it's not easy, and it is. Well, I mean, to me, it's like, I call it the godforsaken coast. It's just steep. You got cut banks. You got, gravel roads. If we get snow, it's like, you start at the bottom, there's nothing. You get to the top and it's patchy. So you're trailing through different conditions.
Right.
And those cats are smart, especially in this coast range. The guys that are running them, they're no slouches. And those cats know how to get up and move. So, like, it made more sense to me when you and I started talking dogs and traits and things like that. You were looking for the same thing back then that we're all striving to find now. It's just that balance of, what I think of when I think of the running dog mixed in there. It's track speed. And you touched on earlier about speed and the importance there. Like, it's a bonus. But I think there was a big revelation for me was when I wrapped my head around there's speed and there's track speed. And if you can consistently move a track faster, it doesn't matter if that dog can run the fastest. Sometimes the best dog is running in the middle. And I've hunted with a couple of really nice dogs. And I got a pup off of one. Her name was Cindy, and my buddy Brandon had her. And I will tell you, that dog ran from the middle, But by God, she held it together and knew how to pick her head up and run when she needed and how to work it out. I mean, probably one of the best dogs I've ever hunted with. And it
That's
was all about track speed because there were no bobbles. It's like this isn't a NASCAR race. You're not clocking top speed. It's A to B, and whoever gets there the fastest is your fastest track dog.
that's exactly right. I was going to say that's pretty observant. A lot of people wouldn't notice that, but the dog that's leading ain't always the one that's carrying the track. It's just a lot of people, they think naturally the dog out there in the front's the one pretty much doing it, but you'll see a lot of times when you got that dog that's maybe running a little behind, they'll get up there and they'll make a lose, and that lead dog will be running all over trying to find that track, and then the real track dog won't even miss a beat. It'll just come right up through there and just keep right on going on the track, and that fast dog will fall back in there with it and pull back out in front of it and shine like a dime.
Right?
But just like you said, that dog in the middle is one that's actually carrying the track.
It's like an airplane taking off. I think of it like some of them dogs, and I got a couple right now that I was just talking with my buddy about. And they're at that point where, I mean, they're not pups. They're 2-3 years old. They're pretty well started. I shouldn't say well started. I mean, like they're going to run and they're going to catch. Maybe not everyone, maybe not solo, but like they're contributing to every single race that they're put in. They're either taking a front on a leapfrog or they're working through a lose. They're contributing and doing a good job. But at
Yeah,
the same time, I see them get hooked up and it scares me to death because it's like they're just pulling back on that joystick. That head's coming up and they're running and they're competing to get the front end and own it. And next thing you know, it's like, oops, missed our turn. Whether that takes 5 seconds to figure out or 20, by that point, even if they owned the front of it, it's gone now because I guarantee you Fancy and Rose are coming right up the rear and they're no more than 50 yards behind them ever. I mean, I would be surprised if they're not like looking at each other constantly, but they're not going to swing wide and miss like that because they've learned. And that track style, man, it is so different to guys who haven't seen it. And I know that because I went from running straight blue dogs with a very different track style to kind of similar stuff to what you're saying, that running dog mixed up stuff.
yeah.
And
It's
I'm no official on it. Like I'm no expert. I don't get out there like some of these guys that are pounding the woods 5 nights a week or more. But when you really start looking, I think I was telling you, it's like some guys can look at a track or a race and it was either good or bad. They caught it or they didn't. And they don't give it a whole lot of second thought. But for me, it's like overanalyzation of things. And you start looking at these little pieces and realizing like it's all out there. If you're looking and you got your eyes open, you can see a lot of what's going on amongst a pack just by just keeping your eyes open.
Yep. That's me. I'm the exact same way. If I lose something, I think about it and think about it and think about it until I think I came up with what happened. I
Right?
mean, you never know unless you see the game setting in a tree for sure. But I kind of think it's a pretty reasonable, logical conclusion. Is what I come to. And that uh, it just something that if I lose it and I don't know why. And that's another thing on the GPS is you can watch them dogs how they track and what they do.
Mm-hmm.
If they say you got a backtracker, one of the probably biggest thing I've ever called dogs for over the years is backtracking off the tree. And with that GPS, they might be away from you where you can't hear them very good or whatever, but you can look on there and see what they're doing. You
Right?
got your old dog. If your old dog, and that's one reason I like pressure tree dogs, you got your old dog up there treeing and you see this young dog, well, he's coming right back on the dang track. And you don't put up with that too
Get on the
much.
button.
Right. To see if they're smart enough to come around or you got to let them go. So
Yeah.
that's one of the good things about the electronics. You can see a little bit about track style too. If say like my dogs that stay close to a track, and I've had them that gosh, they'd swing off out there. I don't know, a long ways off the track looking and stuff. And
Right?
come back in and uh, do little tricks like that I can see and watch and kind of figure out things that way. So
Well, and the one thing you brought up the other night when we were talking too that I thought was really interesting is having enough independence to run them and having enough smarts to get where you need to be. Because like you and I were talking about split races and like these fox are
Yeah,
starting to pair up. They always do, in
yeah,
the early spring, late winter. And it's like, they never seem to split far. That vixen will usually hang pretty close to a den, it seems like, or this is at least what I'm putting together. And that dog fox will make big swings out sometimes, but they're never out of hearing. And then you'll get in a situation where you got two races coming together and it can be a train wreck. I mean, it could either blow up right there or they look like $1,000,000 and all of a sudden you got dogs splitting back off. I've never noticed them change game though. Like on mine, if they're split and running, the dogs that I've seen them running with, they kind of just stay with those when they split apart again. But
yeah.
having a dog that knows it's got it, even though another dog is barking like crazy because it's running its own jumped race and staying put where it needs to be, like that's a trait that I don't think a lot of guys think about because we all want them to jump to where the game is and do that
Right.
leapfrogging and, progress a track. But at the same time, like you sure don't want a dog pulling off of one and bumping the other. I mean, then you end up with two empty trees.
That's something I like. I like when I don't like the dogs splitting up. I like them to stay together, but when it happens, I want them to stay on their own game. I like them to stay after it. And I've had one thing I was tracking two one time, and I had three dogs on one, and Romeo was on the other, and they crossed. They got within. I don't know if it wasn't for the brush, they could have probably seen each other, but they were going opposite direction. Like one was going north, the other was going south, and they all stayed on their own track. They didn't pull in. I know a
Right.
lot of guys would probably prefer that they all got in on one, but mine do that all the time. They stay on the track they're on without honoring the other dog, but also when they tree and there's other dogs still running, they'll hold the tree. They won't pull either. So that's
Right.
that's something like I say, I like a pressure tree dog. For if you're going to hunt more than one dog, I want him to stay treed under pressure.
So do you think they know, like game by its smell, not just species, but like that? And we're talking where they're not switching pieces of game. I think that they know each individual animal has a different smell. Like they know which one's which.
I would agree with that. I think so too. I've often wondered, I leave a lot of game up and I'll go back in there and tree the same varmint over and over. And I kind of figure
They
I
get
figure
to
them
know it.
dogs know it. Yeah.
I think so too. I mean, and that's the best part about hunting, with guys that leave stuff in trees. Yeah, I really appreciate it. There's some ground that we've all hunted and, when you can go in and run a piece of game and then talk about it, it's like, oh man, he gave me the slip. Well, where were you? Oh, well, he came burning down this and he jumped here and, yep, I know right where it happened. I usually pick it up over here or, you get to know the game just as well as the dogs.
Yeah.
And I think it makes a big difference. It's pretty fun when you get on one that's trained up and knows how to run and knows its tricks. And I mean, the greatest one we ever ran, I'll tell you, was 6 hours jumped. And it was, God, that was fun. Not fun the next day because we had to come home and throw dogs away in the kennel and then turn around and drive straight down to the California Houndsman banquet with no sleep. But like we started that track and it was full blown jumped race for 6 hours and it was the greatest sounding thing I've ever heard in the woods.
It's, those are good races, I'll tell you.
There's a big difference between, game that's never been taught how to run. Those
Yeah.
5-10 minute pop-ups are fun, but you get on them that know what they're doing and learn. And I
That's when
think a lot of that has to do with the dogs. And they do learn that piece of game. And they know when those tricks are coming.
Yep. The smart ones do. I think, there's some dogs, I don't think they can ever learn anything, but you take a dog that's got some reasonably good intelligence and they learn like, just like going through culverts.
Yep.
You get some young dogs or something, they might hang up at the one end of that culvert or, well, some might go through it, but after a while, you're a good one, they'll learn to pick that head up and go on the other side of the road and pick the track if it went on through it. Pick the track up going out. And
Even
that
checking culverts, like going down the road, I rode my dogs,
yeah,
so it's like one of them figures out to check a culvert one time, and if it's got brains, every time there's a low spot, that dog's diving for the ditch. It
yeah,
knows, hey, there could be something here.
they go down there and check it out. Yep.
Yeah, and darn good and well there's bad stuff that hangs out in culverts too. you know, they've never
Oh yeah.
seemed to be deterred by that, but I
Oh yeah.
know that's when I kind of first started thinking about the game having its own individual identifying scent. Was, when I first started, I bought a dog named Thumper from a buddy of mine, hunting partner at the time. And I took that dog out, and I'm telling you, I had him in the road with another buddy, Russ. We were roading dogs down the pavement, and these dogs kept bumping. Bark a couple times and they'd go on, but like you could tell something had gone down the road. And I was not happy because this dog was just kind of ignoring it. And, at the time I was new in the sport and I needed a good dog, and I had heard lots of good things about him, but he just wasn't wanting to go. Well, about the time I was thinking he wasn't going to, he got right up in the middle of a mess. Sorry, Russ, I'm not talking crap about your dogs, but it was a skunk, and he got sucked into it too. Well,
Yeah.
that dog was so green in the face. I mean, wallering around, eyes just watering. He's green. If you've never seen a skunk spray close up, let me tell you, it's a different monster.
I have many times. Yep.
Right? Collars are turning colors, and it's the nastiest substance on the planet, I think. So we throw him up on the box, and in my mind, it's like my night's done. This dog's nose is jacked up. He's not going to be able to smell anything. And then he's curled up there on top of the rig, sleeping. And, I don't think anything's going to happen. Next thing you know, that dog's feet, he just jumps to him and goes to striking. And, there's a couple dogs, we turn them loose. And I mean, we had a race on. And I'm like, that was the most mind-blowing moment early on in my hound hunting, that through all that just nasty stink, he smelled what he was supposed to be chasing and let us know. And, he turned out to be, he was a great dog. It took him a while for him and me to figure it out. But, I had to learn that dog definitely knew more than I did, whether I thought so at the time or not. And looking back, it's like that dog taught me a lot more once he was gone even than when I was hunting him. And scent and animal identification, I believe 100% because of that dog. They know.
Oh yeah. I think it takes I raise most of my dogs I raise from puppies, so I know them from the ground up. But if you go guys that buy a dog, you're not gonna. It's gonna take weeks, maybe months or longer to learn that dog and all its habits and traits and stuff. That he has. But you just don't. Every dog's different too, so you gotta hunt them for a while to learn them, and that's a mistake some people make when they get a dog. They don't give it a. I mean, you can only go for the trial period, but they don't hunt a dog long enough to learn its traits, and
Right.
and if, with a new owner and stuff, they won't. Some of them don't act the same, because I've sold dogs that were just man shy, and the guys had to. One guy, he kept the dog. I told him to bring her back, but he kept her for 2 or 3 more weeks, and he said she was fine then, and he went to catching cat with her, and
Yeah.
it just took a little time to get to know the dog, and her get to know him, so.
And I think they know when there's an ownership change.
Oh yeah, yeah,
I've bought enough dogs over the years. I mean, I'm not a guy that is known for training dogs or making dogs, honestly, because I got a family and I don't hunt as much as it takes to make a lot of dogs. But it's one of those things that they see an ownership change, and if your program is different, it's almost like a reset switch. Some of them, and very few, I think, you can just hand to somebody and they go perform 100% the way they always do, like a machine.
right.
I think even ownership changes as far as game, and like dogs that have never ran a deer and all of a sudden are like burning them up. Well, something happened in that dog's brain to think it was okay. And I think some of that is just the program or changing owners because
I
they're animals. I mean,
yeah,
they know.
I think a lot of that, I think a dog will actually test you, your new owner, you know.
Mm-hmm.
They know, you know, like you said, the new owners handle them a little different or something. So they might something they wouldn't do for their past owner. They might, well, I'll just try this, see if I can get away with it or whatever, you know. And the dogs are they're a lot more intelligent. Some of them, they're a lot more intelligent than what a guy thinks they are, you know.
Yeah, you don't give them near enough credit, especially when you're new and you think you know everything. Let me tell you,
Right.
that dog probably knows a lot more. At least all mine did.
Yeah, they're quite an amazing animal, especially like when you get one that's got some intelligence, you know. They'll constantly surprise you, you know.
Mm-hmm.
If you hunt a bunch of them or several of them and you got one that you'll be running a cat or a fox and you'll think it's lost and this one dog will pull it out some way or another. It figures it out and pulls it out of the bag and trees it. You know, you kind of wonder, well, what makes him so special? How come he figured it out and they didn't, or whatever, you know? And it usually comes. I mean, it comes down to intelligence most of the time. You know, something they can figure out
Right.
that another dog just doesn't have the brain power to. You know.
Yeah, some never learn. I've had some of them
No,
too. It's like, is this your first trip to the woods? Yeah, you're doing the job, but like you're not. You can tell you didn't learn.
you can. You know, a lot of guys think you can just if you repeat something enough, a dog will learn it, and that's true for some dogs. But there's some of them you could hunt from birth to death, and they'll never learn it. You know,
Yep.
and it's just those. When I was young, I kept. I'd get a dog and do a little bit of something, and I'd hold on to that thing for years. You know, and they're just and you get another dog, you take it out there a few times, and it just starts doing it. You know, and after a while, well, man, I'm just not going to put that kind of time in the dog. There's something I can get something that'll do better quicker, you know. So, who wants to? I do give I mentioned this, but I give my dogs till they're 2.5. If they're not treeing by then I get rid of them, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had them. Well, like Romeo was 8 months, but most of them are treeing probably somewhere from 18 months to 2.5. And you know, the registered dogs usually tree a little bit quicker, but
Right.
I figure by the time they're 2.5, well, actually they should be doing everything by then if you raise them from a pup and hunt them steady and stuff.
Right.
But at the same time, I've also known guys that had dogs that didn't start treeing until they were 5 years old, and that was walkers, you know. But that's something some old timers will tell you that back 50 years ago that wasn't unusual for them to wait that long to
Mm-hmm.
go to tree, and some of them. But I mean, you know, for the average guy, you know, that's half the life of the dog. You know,
Right.
it's kind of a waste of time to me, I guess maybe. But if uh, if you held on to that, I know one of them was made a dang good. It was a good cat dog after he started treeing, you know.
Right.
But that's a little too long for me to hold on to him.
Well, like you said, you know, you can get into something that's going to do it all earlier, and then they're constantly making progression where the other ones, it's like they're never going to meet.
Yeah,
There's a level, right? An unspoken level
right.
we expect to see them at.
Yep, they got that. They reach their peak, and that's it. And that's another thing about treeing. I was going to mention. All dogs got a tree switch in them, but it ain't set for the same time.
I like
You know
that.
that some of them will start treeing. You know, like registered dogs generally tree earlier, but not always. The Raisin's dad was a registered, and he was 2.5, right to my limit before he started treeing. And but I've had you know, like several dogs that would tree right around probably 12, 15 months old started treeing. You know, and then a lot of them out in this country that got a running dog in them, a lot of them won't tree till right around 2, and
Hmm.
then maybe 2.5. You know, so
A
they
lot of
got to.
game.
Yeah, that takes game repetition, you know, on that and getting to and keeping them away from junk. You know, you can take a good bred tree dog and put it with something that's dumb like a backtracker and have that thing run in a little while. You know, if you
Yeah.
don't catch it or put the QTs to it for a while quickly.
Well, and that's, I think a lot of people get age too in their head. You know, you think about a 2-year-old dog, but if he's only been to the woods a half dozen times, you know,
Right.
it's game
That's a
exposure. And I
that's the
know,
difference.
You guys, I know you're out chasing fox and bobcat. And I was going to ask you this because everybody wants to know, and I hate answering this question. What What do you think is a bigger challenge for the dog, the fox or the cats?
Well, on I think a fox actually runs harder, but they're easier to locate, and a bobcat is it's a lot harder to locate on.
Mm-hmm.
But I think a fox, there's dogs that can tree bobcat fairly consistently, but it can't tree fox.
Yeah,
So them little foxes running little son of a guns.
yeah,
Uh,
and that's what I hear a lot from the guys, that are serious hunters. Is oh, I know Mike talks about it all the time. Finding a dog that'll consistently catch a gray fox that's a dog.
yeah,
A lot of dogs can catch them, and I'm not trying to sound like an elitist, but I am saying consistency with those things. If you're catching them regular, man, you got something in your kennel.
yeah. They, I'll tell you, a good thing about them is they don't generally cattle. I believe a bobcat actually will cover more ground, cover more
More
area than a
territory,
fox. Yeah, a fox will kind of stay. Once you get them jumped, they'll stay like in a valley, or sometimes you don't even have to move the pickup.
right?
An old bobcat gets a lead on them, and they going over the next mountain sometimes. So
Yeah.
that's another little difference. But there are a lot of similarities. They kind of run a lot alike when they're circle, duck and dodge. They run pretty similar to each other, but I don't know. The fox just seems like they got to have a little extra oomph in them to
Yeah.
tree those things.
They got an extra gear.
Yeah, and they don't weigh nothing. I've seen them come across the road, and they didn't look like their feet ever touched the ground. Look like they just floated across. And they're a small animal too. And
Hmm.
I've often said they make a bobcat look clumsy if you ever watch one of them.
Yeah, I mean the biggest one I think I've ever weighed because I was with the Cascade Houndsman Association, doing their weigh-ins for a while back, and I think the biggest one we ever weighed in was like 9 pounds. Like that's a big fox.
Yeah.
11, 12 pounder. That's a giant.
Yes. I don't think I've ever treated 11 pounder. I keep records on all mine, but I know usually I think the average is like 8 or 9 pounds for an
Hmm.
adult, but I think I might have caught a 10 pounder a time or two. And now, just like you said, that's a big looking fox right there.
Yeah, and it's a small scent pad. Those feet are not real big. They're like a
No,
kitten.
tiny. Yeah.
But like Sonny Turner told me, he says, "Son, as long as they're up and they're sweating, you're in business. You get them cooled down and they get out from under them and out of the pocket. It's a little different story getting them, trailed back up and under them. But he says you keep under them and stinking, you got a race going.
Yeah. There. I think. I think I've actually uh, tended to catch a few more of them on the ground that just for whatever reason they didn't want a tree. And the
Hmm.
dogs eventually overhaul them. But uh, I mean that ain't taken away from bobcat. Bobcat. I think they lose you more out of brains. I think
Oh
just
yeah, they're a different
the
monster
slipping.
too,
Yeah,
and
they're
I'm not good
slipping.
at them. Let me tell you.
Slipping back and forth on their track and laying down, and they just pull all kinds of tricks, and that's where the old dog's got to have some brains and start doing some thinking on them.
And like you just hit it on the head. I love that about like when you were talking about kind of knowing what you're running by how they're running. And it's always fun. Like there was one race one night and this thing was ducking and backtracking. I mean, and it was to a T in my mind a cat. Like there's no doubt in my mind we are running a bobcat right now. He squatted on us probably a half dozen times within 100 yards. And these dogs are just ripping back and forth and he'd pick them up. And it was a train wreck waiting to happen. And they put him up and it was a fox. And it's like, that is the weirdest running fox I've ever been on in my life. And I guess they all could learn the same tricks, but it is funny how those cats like to duck, especially if you're running them hot and hot on them.
Yeah. They just, I don't know. They just, I think I know what happens. I've seen them lay down, but for whatever reason, and especially they'll lay down where they've run around in a circle
Mm-hmm.
for a half hour. They'll get out there and lay down in it, and them dogs will run all over them. And then the cat finally gets a little breather. They get a little far away from him. It'll jump up and take off again, you know.
Or they step on him. If he's
Yeah.
not real smart and picks a bad spot, it's
Oh yeah, I I was running one time and I was up in the road and the dogs were down in a creek in a rocky creek and I seen the cat come up on this boulder and it just laid down. And it laid there for a minute or two. One of the dogs come up there and run it off. And they run around there again a little while longer. Pretty soon the cat come right back on that same rock and laid down again. Then a different dog come up there and spooked it and it jumped back off in the creek. But when it jumped off in the creek, it jumped right in the middle of the rest of the dogs.
oh
The old
no.
fight was on, you know. So,
Yeah, that's never fun. Those cats
oh
are
no,
not real fun to catch like that. I like seeing them
no,
way up there.
I know. I like, it don't take much of a bite or something. You got it. Then you're doctoring dogs, I was hunting for antibiotics here a while back to doctor my dog up that got ate up on one, you know, and nowadays the way they've got the antibiotics, you got to go to a vet, you know, so it costs you X money. So I just assume they let me decide whether the cat gets taken or not, you know.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's a little nicer when you're in the driver's seat.
Yeah, yeah, you make the decision, but you know, sometimes it doesn't happen that way. But if I had my preference, I want them up a tree.
Right. Now, you hunt a lot, I know, with your grandson. Does he like the cat hunting or the fox hunting more? Does he just like being out there with grandpa?
I think he just likes being out there with me.
Yeah.
He might like cat a little better. We've been treeing more of them. The couple places I hunted fox got thinned out, so there's not as many fox in there. So we actually been treeing more bobcat. And we tree some dang longtails. Not, you know, we're not looking for them anymore, but there's getting to be so many of them. It's hard to keep your dogs off of them. That's that one story I wrote in there. That's what that was about. You know, it just we
Mm-hmm.
were out fox hunting and run across that dang thing. But that was quite an event. But I think he just likes it all. He's getting these pups. This dog's his and that dog's his, you know. And hopefully after that hunt we were on there that got bee stung on, he swore he was never going to go hunting with me again after that, but he
Oh,
changed
no.
his mind since then.
Yeah, and I know that's an article. I got to talk to Danny. That's going to be coming out in a future issue of Full Cry. I don't know if it made it in this one just because of space,
Yeah.
but for all you listeners that are aware of Full Cry magazine, I'll shameless plug it again. Robin wrote an article for us, and yeah, those yellow jackets, man, that is not fun. Poor kid.
Oh, I know. He got, oh, if it had been the summertime, I don't know what would happen, but our clothes protected us, you know, but then they get you in the face and the hands, and some of them got up under my shirt and got going around my belt. They ended up stinging me all around the top of my belt, you know, and I don't know, it's got a burning, itching feeling for
Oh yeah.
a day or two after that, you know. And he got sick that night from it. I don't know if it was from the bee stings or not, but he threw up several times that night. Uh,
Man, I've
he
been
did. I
there.
mean,
That is rough. Like, do you guys have the bald face hornets up there?
well, these were, yeah, we do, but these were yellow jackets,
Yeah, they're
you know,
almost
in the
bad.
ground. They were in the ground, and I'll tell you, it's something, a squirrel or a skunk. They didn't, if it had been like a bear, I would have knew to avoid it, but it was just a little scratch over the hole there, probably a
Hmm.
skunk. And I just didn't think. I walked over, boy, here they come. They were madder than hornets, and they let us know it, you know.
Oh yeah, and you get hit more than a couple of times. I know I took a buddy of mine, and it was his first trip hunting with me. First trip with dogs. I'm wearing a bright orange T-shirt, and I
Oh,
stepped on one of those bald face hornets nests,
oh,
and they chased us down the mountain to the point I told him, like, I'm starting to shake. You need to drive. If I can't drive, I'm going to pull over. You got to go down this road. I gave him directions. You get to the blacktop and you haul. Because I'm not allergic. But when you get hit 15, 20 times,
right.
oh my
Yep.
God, that was the worst feeling as far as like pain and just your mind not being right. It'll make you foggy. And that adrenal rush is just, God, that was horrible. A
I've
kid,
been,
I can imagine it would really mess with.
yeah, Well, you know, we didn't. It took us a couple hours to get out of the canyon, so I knew he wasn't like having any symptoms at the time. But
Sure.
they said that could have, kind of caused him to get a little sick later. But if we'd, they were all over him. But they couldn't sting. They were trying to sting through his shirt, but they couldn't. Stingers wouldn't reach through the shirt, or hell, we might have both been dead.
Right.
They were just, I don't know, hundreds of them. He probably had, his back was completely covered when we stopped, and they were all from his shoulders to his waist. They were just trying to dig it. You could see them trying to sting, and I just started smashing them. But if that many bees that had actually stung him, all of them
Right.
got to his body, there could have been a real problem there.
At least he's still going back for more.
Yeah, it discouraged him for a little bit, but then he was ready to go the next time.
No, that's great, man. Well, I'll tell you what, Robin, I appreciate you coming on. I already tied up an hour of your night, but I appreciate you getting back on with me. We had a really good conversation on the phone the other day, and I appreciate you getting back on and kind of rehashing some of that for the listeners, and we'll have to maybe think about trying this again.
Okay, well, you know how it is about howling and talking.
It's pretty
probably
easy, huh?
we're talking about the past and the future and what's going on now. It's pretty easy to time goes by pretty fast talking about the old hounds.
Oh, I know. Well, I've really enjoyed it. Stay in touch, and maybe I'll hit you up for part 2. I want to talk about some of these pups that you're saying you got off of Romeo, and like as they progress, I'd like to touch base with you again and maybe do a little comparison, because I think that was a topic that just came up in our conversation about the same crosses and performance. Yeah. It'd be nice to get back with you if you're up for it and kind of talk on that a little more.
Oh, I got all kinds of time. That's all I've been laid up because of the weather here lately, but that's when you're retired, you got all kinds of time and nothing better to do than talk about hunting.
Well, we appreciate it, bud. You have yourself a good evening.
All right, Jason. It's good talking to you, and we'll talk to you later.
All righty.